Thank you so much for being here. I hope your weekend is going well. If you're following our Atlanta track and you're in Eastern time zone, around then, we're about halfway through the weekend. So everybody's rocking and rolling, working very hard, getting a lot done. We're really excited. We're also very excited for the speaker panel that we've put together for y'all this weekend. We have some amazing people joining us. I'm really excited that they were able to come and support 48 and 48. And I know that their words of wisdom are really going to be inspiring and exciting for all the volunteers who hear them. So I want to introduce our moderator, Kashi Sehgal. Kashi is the co-founder of GigaBark. She founded a social enterprise here in Atlanta during the pandemic that focuses on food waste called Rataza. She founded a ethics consulting firm called For Ethica. She really has her hand in a bunch of spaces, a bunch of digital and tech spaces that we are so excited to bring to the table with this panel. So I'll pass it off to Kashi, who is also a member of the 48 and 48 board. So we're so happy that you could be here.
Thanks for having me. Hi everyone. This is another amazing 48 and 48 event, and we're very excited to be here with you. I'm going to take a seat, and I'm going to welcome our panelists, Guy, and then we're being joined remotely by 3 more amazing speakers. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because they can do it best. So Guy, please start and kick things off.
Thank you, Kashi. Very good. So my name is Guy Powell, and I am the founder and president of ProRelevant, ProRelevant.com. And we do marketing analytics and consulting, and one of the things that we've learned is how to build what we call a marketing machine so that your marketing can be predictable, accountable, and profitable.
Awesome. All very important things. All right, Patrice.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patrice Key-Rhone. I am the Global Director of Employee Giving and Volunteerism at IBM. I lead those efforts globally, and I'm super excited to be joining you all virtually today.
Awesome. We're happy to have you. Charlitta.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Charlitta from Charlotte. I bring you greetings from Charlotte, North Carolina on behalf of Slalom. I am super excited to be here and share a space with each of you. I am a client services director, and essentially that means I get to work with some of the most transformational companies, with some of the brightest people in the world to collaborate and solve problems, usually powering them through technology and globally. So honored to share space with everyone here today.
Thanks for being here. And last but not least, Monoswita.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. My name is Monoswita Saha. I am the Employee Engagement Leader for Corporate Social Responsibility for Kyndryl. I'm coming to you from Connecticut. Kyndryl is a new technology services company. We have almost a year under our belt as being an independent company. We're about 90,000 strong worldwide, and just excited to have a great conversation with you all. And shout out to all of the volunteers who have been working very hard since Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, volunteers and all the people here building great sites. I think this panel is very well topically suited for what everybody's doing today around the world. It's amazing. Okay, so I want to kick things off with a question for everybody. What does global connectivity mean to you, and what does digital inclusion mean to you personally?
Sure, well, I'll start. One of the things that I've found with a lot of the bigger brands that we work with is that they can grow the business kind of from a demand side, but one of the problems that they're having now, especially post-COVID, is growing the business on the supply side. And supply side generally means employees in a lot of cases. And if you think about how hard it is now to hire really good employees and certainly great marketers, and certainly then 48 and 48 has some of the best. So what brands now need to do is not only generate demand, but they have to build their employer brand so that they can hire the people that they want and also retain the people that they want. And that has to do with what the total brand is of the employer, which certainly includes diversity and inclusion and many other things, but certainly those two today are really at the top. And so if they're able to do that, then they're really very good at being able to get the talent that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, and I completely echo his sentiments. And I think to me personally, in its simplest form, for me, it's a minimum of every single person having equitable access to infrastructure, to access to education, and access to all of these different resources globally. And it's in a variety of different ways, through smart devices, through connectivity, through internet. And then it's complementing all of these different resources through digital literacy and so much more. So for me, just at a minimum, when I think about global connectivity and digital inclusion, it starts with connectivity, it starts with the devices. And for me, it expands through digital literacy, and then the access and opportunities through digital literacy. And then from an employer perspective and an employee engagement perspective, is for us to build in programs and programming to ensure that we create equity across our programs so that we can raise awareness and ensure that we create offerings for every single person to be able to be a part of those offerings.
I completely agree. It's 2022. So being able to unite people from all around the world, various time zones, languages, skills, it's a necessity and not a privilege. We know that many of us are represented here working at global corporations. We're raising young scholars to be globally minded. We're making impact right now, locally and nationally. And so we must be able to bring the world together, and we get to do that with technology. And so I'm personally invested in that. And I think that we have to remember that while we're uniting and connecting, that not everybody has the access that Patrice is talking about. And we have to take a pause to make sure that we're not excluding and that we're bringing folks along the way, so that we don't continue the divide, whether it was before through education or economics. Now we're seeing technology in that space as well.
Absolutely. I feel like, the word that resonates a lot with me, Patrice, you mentioned equity, and I think it's come up in the other panelists too. I mean, it's part of our language now. It's a language of business. It's a language of being. Technology is how we share and consume information. And so when I think about it, I mean, yes, there's the business sense of it. I mean, how connected and how we use technology to connect our people inside and outside establishes the culture, the strength of the business, the brand, but it also has this ripple effect. And like the equity piece really just sticks with me personally, because I feel as though this has become our language. And to the extent that a person is proficient or non-proficient, really influences their access to opportunity in the community and beyond. And in terms of global, I mean, it's no new news. We live in a global economy. And so I think what it is, the extent of how aware people are of that economy and that connectivity really, really influences their ability to adapt and to react and to thrive in their communities, because that's our world. I mean, what happens somewhere else impacts us in the community, whether we're aware or not. And then the digital inclusion piece is also part of just, are you speaking the common language as everyone else? And if not, then, that person, that community is at a disadvantage. So to me, it trickles down to equity at the most fundamental piece.
Yes. And so all of you have talked about how this trickles in, your personal beliefs trickle into this business ethos that your companies actually share a lot. So could you walk us through what your companies are doing as it relates to global connectivity, digital inclusion? How are you thinking about it? What processes are in place? How are you engaging employees or your stakeholders?
Yeah, sure. And I guess I'll go first again. But well, unfortunately, we're a pretty small company, but our clients are pretty big. And what we've found is exactly that: is to help them to include inclusion, diversity, and equity in what they're doing. And so when our main function is to measure how effective they are, and then to be also able to help them to be more effective. And what we try and do, and just about all of our clients do this, is they really look at, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and we then use that as a way to help them to gauge how successful they are, both on the consumer demand side, but also on the employer branding side. And I think that overall helps. And what that means to me is that they really, on the employer side especially, is that they're looking at their employees and really understanding where they might have weaknesses or where they might have strengths, and then to help them to figure out how they can do a better job there. So absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm happy to go next. At IBM, we launched a program called IBM Skills Build. I'm sure some of you all have heard of this program, but at IBM, we have this program called IBM Skills Build, and it is open to anyone. And I think the really fascinating thing about IBM Skills Build is that it's open to anyone with any type of a digital connection, and it is absolutely free of charge. The wonderful thing about IBM Skills Build is that it offers different types of personas. So when we think about the inclusivity of the program and ensuring that we can truly meet our learners and individuals where they are, the different personas that we offer is post-secondary learners between those ages of about 13 to 18. We have the path for adult learners, we have a path for educators, but then we also offer a path for job seekers. And this is extremely important because through our particular program, learners get to choose various learning paths, not just one, but they can choose various learning paths. They can focus on job skills, courses, credentials, and again, all of this is for free. And this is extremely important during this particular time in 2022, where there's a particular focus on micro-credentialing, badging, reskilling, upskilling. But in this program, individuals get to gain core technology and workplace skills for competencies. With this is extremely important because they really get to potentially compete for in-demand jobs. So if you think about roles in like cybersecurity, this is where this is really important. And I also think that as a company that we all must do our part to bridge the digital divide and resources for free in our respective areas that we operate in. But even more importantly, we must cross-collaborate with our various partners in different industries to ensure that there's access to these free services, that there's opportunity in a variety of different areas. So we can create all of this wonderful content, but if there's no internet, if there's no connectivity to the internet, then this doesn't really mean anything. But we know that the internet exists. We know there's 5G deployment. So for us, we've created this program. It's free of charge. We have multiple personas to ensure that it's a digital connectivity, it's global connectivity, and that it's inclusive for every single one. And it really doesn't matter what particular path they select or what walk of life that they're in. So if they're a job seeker or an adult learner, we've created this program that's free because we recognize that in 2022, we have individuals that may be in a particular place that need to move into a different realm. We recognize that micro-credentialing is important to the workforce and that we need this in today's workforce. So for IBM, this is the program that we've launched. And for many of you that don't know, please feel free to go check it out. If you are familiar with it, go check it out and check out the various career paths. For those that are mid-career, like this is an opportunity to grab some badges. Those are, really important features for anyone that's just looking for a career change.
Yeah. Definitely go check that out.
So I can talk about Kyndryl. We're at a slightly different stage of our career. And so, we are a global technology service company as well. And so I think, thinking about these things, it's part of our DNA because we operate at the core of this global economy and we work closely with industries and businesses to drive commerce, to keep systems alive. We're also, a purpose-driven, human-centric company that's coming up to its first year of life. And so, part of our mission is that when we act as a company, we do so as a partner with our customers and with our communities. And so in this first year, outside of the business, our focus has been to really understand what our employees care about and use this information to set the strategy for community impact in terms of how we can use our technology, our skills our resources to, again, increase access to opportunities, to really act in ways that are meaningful to our employee base. And so, with employee centrism as a key, what I'll say is, within 7 days of us becoming a public company last November, we launched an employee survey to ask our global employee base about their priorities in corporate social responsibility. And we used that input and research to set our impact areas and to inform our first partnerships and our first, pilot initiatives. And so our impact areas are climate action, future forward education, and inclusive economy. Future forward education and inclusive economy in particular are areas where we're diving into to see, what more we can do as a company, really leveraging our employee skills, passions, talents, resource base, and things like that. But really, this first year has been to set that first foundation. And the first partnerships have been really with organizations such as Echoing Green, Authority Group, organizations that have really global reach and center on inclusion and community empowerment, and specifically about empowering entrepreneurs who don't have traditional access to investment and training, but who are based in underserved communities and who are really committed to increasing opportunities in the community. So our strategy has been setting a foundation, going on a learning journey, and setting a strategy that's really hyper-local to community needs, but global in terms of how they map back to those impact areas that our employee base has, served us up as their key priorities for them.
Awesome.
And I can round this out. So awesome feedback. I think Slalom is probably a very aligned with 4848, where it's a national organization, impact locally. And so our organization is global. And what I love about what we do is that we are all kind of interlocking of how we make our connections from a local perspective and tie those all together. So for example, many people are familiar with like Girls Who Code. And so what we do is we all kind of lock hands together, making a Slalom impact with those local chapters. Really knowing that if you want to kind of build that technology divide, you've got to go to where the technologists are, and how do we empower that, particularly with girls and women, and unlocking their potential. The other thing that I think is cool that Slalom offers is what we call a hackathon. And we partner with nonprofits to help them solve some of the problems that they're doing, whether locally, nationally, or globally. And we take our skills and our talents and we do kind of pro bono work, whether it's kind of building them an application, building them infrastructure, helping them unlock capacity for their human resources so that they can continue to do the work that they're doing locally, nationally, and globally. And so I think it's awesome to be a part of a technology consulting firm where, similar to you, Monoswita, where we're just wired and geared to take our skills and our talents and figure out how we can help with the digital divide globally, but do it together.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrice, I want to throw this now back to you. You mentioned a lot of this micro-credentialing and ways that the general public can get involved with what IBM is doing, but how are your employees participating in skill-based volunteering, and what does it mean to them to participate in this? What are they getting out of this outside of just doing something for work, at work?
That's a wonderful question. So we leverage skills-based volunteerism. Well, let me just back up a little. So within my wheelhouse at IBM, I lead employee giving and volunteerism globally. So we offer our employees the ability to participate in general volunteerism and skills-based volunteerism. And I do make that delineation because general volunteerism is meaningful volunteerism, and it is just as impactful as skills-based volunteerism. So I do want to make that delineation because individuals like myself, we're passionate about giving back to the nonprofits that are meaningful, and the work that we do is just as meaningful as skills-based volunteerism. But when we think about skills-based volunteerism and we think about some of the issues that are plaguing our society, skills-based volunteerism really takes it to a different level. And this is where we truly get to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And so when we think about disaster preparedness, when we think about what's really driving driving the needs of nonprofits and NGOs, and we think about the critical needs of what those NGOs or what businesses need, what communities need, and they may not have the capital to cover. This is truly where skills-based volunteerism comes into play. And so in the skills-based volunteerism realm, this is where we truly leverage talent and technology to drive sustainable and measurable impacts, and then we truly get to scale those efforts globally. IBM is a global company. We're in over 170 different countries. So as you can imagine, we get a variety of different issues that happen at any given moment. And for us as a company, we try to figure out how can we respond to the needs of the communities that we live and work in the best way possible. And we meet those needs in a variety of different ways. Through skills-based volunteerism, we take the issues of the private sector, the public sector, nonprofits, NGOs, education organizations, disaster preparedness organizations, and we activate these resources that we have in a variety of skills, and we bring in all of these different technologies, and we activate, we build things, and we deploy these resources in impactful and meaningful ways that matter to these organizations. So we're able to take something, we're able to build things, we're able to translate things, we're able to take open source coding and chat bots and things like that and build these things for NGOs and for nonprofit organizations and organizations that really just don't have the capital to pay for these types of services. And it's not always technology driven. We have projects that are cybersecurity driven. We have a project that's open right now that's dealing with ransomware. But this is where we truly get to capitalize on the talent of our IBMers, solve some of the world's biggest problems, and deploy, or not necessarily deploy, but activate these solutions into the communities, the countries, and the regions where our IBMers live and work and solve these issues in a variety of different ways, featuring pro bono and long-term volunteerism solutions that really truly help build and sustain and creates economic value back into the community. So that's truly what skills-based volunteerism is. And we have over 111 rich years of history of fixing issues and, coming into communities and truly being a solution to problems for many businesses and many communities, many organizations, and meeting those needs. It also gives us a way to sharpen our skills and our talents and to be able to add those back to our resumes. And so because we are a technology-driven organization and industry, our IBMers are happy to test their talents in these ways so that they can ensure that they're continuously sharpening their skills in a variety of different ways. So they're happy and eager to volunteer their talents to solve some of these problems in the communities. And so that's how we leverage skills-based volunteerism.
That's great. And as we think about the volunteers we have all around the world today, just think about how you can use some of these resources that she's talking about in your communities. Reach out to your local IBM office and see how they can help. Okay, so Monoswita, I want to ask you, you have a unique perspective on being part of a private, then public company, thinking about these issues. What has shifted for the company and the way you think about global connectivity and digital inclusion, or how you approach it, or what practices are in place? Has anything changed from being one to the other?
Yeah, I think the biggest change is the fact that, we're building a base from the ground up. We're a new company, which I think is the biggest defining factor. And so for us, it's really been about making sure that we engage our employees as partners and stakeholders in the journey. So, doing that employee survey at the very beginning, really within 7 days of becoming independent was important for us because, the issues themselves are all encompassing and they are huge and they're global, but how it's felt can be very local. People have local community problems or challenges that they feel deeply about and they want to engage in. So establishing that understanding, that baseline has been really critical for us. And then really using the employee input to define our strategy. So I mentioned Authority Group as an early partner for Kyndryl. So even when looking into our portfolio of partnerships at this early stage, we looked to our employee base. Authority Group is a nonprofit that is founded by one of our employees. It has global reach and engages Kyndryl's volunteers to really apply their skills to help other aspiring entrepreneurs get their nonprofits off the ground. Nonprofits that are, again, like meeting local needs. Same thing in terms of other partnerships and other initiatives that we're getting off the ground. What we're doing right now is we're starting small with different pilots, different initiatives. We're gauging interest, impact, and then we're scaling accordingly. We're using technology to bring our people together in terms of what they're interested in. And then, based on the impact, we'll expand or we'll modify problems and things like that. So, digital inclusion, I mean, it's still a research area for us in terms of figuring out exactly how we can leverage our people and whether it's going to be a company-wide initiative or it's going to be more local or regional based. So we're still in those early pieces yet, and it's piloting, it's testing, and going on from there.
Yep, absolutely. Guy, so we're talking a lot about stakeholders, all kinds of different stakeholders. And at the end of the day, these are businesses that we're talking about that are thinking about connectivity, thinking about skill-based volunteering, thinking about all these ways that they can engage all kinds of stakeholders. But at the end of the day, it's a business and it has to make money, right? So you have written so many books on marketing, a lot of books, you should check them out, on marketing and analytics and how to make the most of those marketing dollars that you're spending. How do you balance the spend and the efficiency that you need to get out of those marketing dollars, because resources are limited, with this concept of inclusion and connectivity and having this ethos around how you spend it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's definitely, I think for a for-profit company, that can certainly be a challenge. Sure. And I think a lot of the for-profit companies have done a pretty good job because they have to. I mean, if you listen to IBM with Patrice and Monoswita, and then of course we have a new guest, it looks like. And but in any case, that is really becoming critical, and I think the upper management and the executive structure of the companies are really understanding how critical that is. Two things though, we are working though with a nonprofit. And their measure of effectiveness is not necessarily to generate profit. I mean, certainly they do want to be able to make money. They don't want to keep asking their donors to give in more money and more money. And so the effectiveness is now two-pronged. You have effectiveness, which is, in their case, engagement. And then in the other case is to at least break even so that they can afford to keep pushing their their nonprofit goal. And so measurement, and that's what we do, is analytics and measurement, and is we help them so that we can say that yes, here's how you're going to make a profit, but secondarily and actually primarily, here's how you have been able to engage with the people that you're trying to target. And I think that dual goal is critical. Now, sometimes, of course, you could say, well, you can't have two masters. But I think some companies have been able to effectively do that and pursue what their real mission is, and yet have this kind of second, maybe not even second, but a parallel primary tier of needing to be profitable. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, though, when you're looking at how do you drive the business and grow the business, one of the clients that we've spoken with about this quite often is they can be really effective at growing demand, but how do they be effective at actually delivering on it? And their particular delivery is about having employees and having retention of employees and then growing their employee base. And their revenue is directly tied to that, and they're a service company. And so then that's where then this other activity is where you have to also have the demand generation, but you also have to have the supply generation through your employees and your growth and retention of your employees. And so, you know, it's really trying to balance both of those things, which is kind of comes into your question, is how do you balance kind of the one side of profit and then the other side of whatever your mission happens to be. So yeah, it's a fun business, that's for sure.
Fun and interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Charlitta, something you mentioned during our previous discussion was something that I really believe in, was that global connectivity shouldn't be a privilege. Can you expand on what you meant by that, and what would it mean? What would it look like for it to be a right?
So kind of what I mentioned earlier in our earlier comments, that it's 2022. And so whereas we know that technology formerly was a privilege, right? Like I recall getting a computer for the first time when I was in middle school in our home, and, you know, AOL, and like, what did it mean to have dial-up, and the transformation there. But that was a privilege even then. That was not common. And I think as our society has grown post, you know, the .com era, we operate in a way in which everyone has access to technology. And so Slalom has done a lot of work to produce some thought leadership in this space. And a couple of things I would love to call out, which is, did you know that 26% of adults earning less than $30,000 have access to a smartphone and not a computer or a tablet? So that makes mobile first being more than just a design consideration. But do we do that? And as we think about our roles in our companies and how we have our seats at the table, how do we think about, oh, everybody just has a tablet, everybody has a computer at home? Well, that's not true. Here in the US, there is a rough estimate that 20 to 40 million Americans do not have broadband internet at home. So where do we think that number lies globally? Right? So when we start talking about that global digital divide and connectivity, we're operating on the assumption that everybody has internet in their home and everybody has access to a computer. And we don't have that here in the US, and we know that number would be multiplied on a global scale. And then there's speed, right? And so you're connected and you may not have the broadband capabilities or the speed that you need. So there's that component, there's the private component. So if you don't have it and you have to go somewhere publicly, what are the barriers to get there? What are the hours? What if we're in lockdown again? What if you need to do something secure? So like that's the first thing where we operate, that it is a necessity for many millions of people across the world. It's a privilege. And how do we close that gap? The second thing I'd call out is that everybody knows how to use it. So more than 1/3 of adults over the age of 65 have never used the internet. So there's a digital literacy component, there's a trust factor there, I can work around it. But what are we building in this world when we want to have digital inclusion for everyone, when we don't have everyone on the landscape? And then we know there's a reading level proficiency that would be required there as well. And then the last piece I would call out is everyone can use it. So in 2019, an audit was done that said 98% of web pages had accessibility violations. Because of intersectionality, we know if you don't have access to technology at your home and you need accommodations, what do those spaces look like publicly? And so as I think about our role, our conversation here today, and what we can do to change the narrative and make it a real life, something in our generation where technology is a utility, right? It is not an option to not have access, to not have the tools you need to be able to connect, to be able to do what you need to do so that you can provide for your families, for your community, and to be able to do your job. I think all of us here have a responsibility to not continue to operate as if it is currently a necessity, because it's a necessity in our bubble, and to burst those bubbles, widen the circle, and really make sure that we're building platforms for all and making accommodations there.
If I could
Sure.
add something on that, Charlitta, you bring up such a good point. You know, I wonder whether you like Elon Musk or not. He is launching the Starlink system for internet access, and I think there's another one that's coming out of England. And there might be 3 or 4 global communications infrastructure providers coming up. I don't know what their costs are, but I think, you know, that last mile is always the most expensive, and hopefully that'll help to solve, well, at least get us a little bit of the way there to be able to solve the access problem. And then to your point that, you know, so many people do have phones but don't have computers, is how do you then marry the two so that you can take this Starlink and the other services that are going to come out, and hopefully, you know, like I said, at some reasonable price, to be able to marry them with technology and with computers. So I think we're on the cusp of really making a big strides there to give global connectivity, you know, a big leap forward.
Yeah. Hopefully competition here is a good thing. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So the last 2 years have been crazy for everybody globally, right? We can't talk about digital inclusion and global connectivity without addressing how digital we went for the last couple of years. So what did we learn? This is for anybody. What did we learn? What do we take away from that? How does it impact where we go?
I'll start because I'll just kind of round out my comments there. Is I think we've learned that it has to be a right and not a privilege. We became so dependent overnight on technology. Our kids had to be, if like in our community in Charlotte, if they didn't have a Chromebook or iPad, you know, people were donating and giving them to them. Companies were donating hotspots. You know, all of us left our offices and immediately became virtual, and had to figure it out. And I think we have to take the lessons that we've learned and realize that we probably left a lot of folks behind, and we need to be prepared to make sure that everyone has the access they need, because that's the direction that we're going. And we do not want to continue to have these divides that would end up crossing racial, gender, and socioeconomically. Technology can be a uniting force for us if we use it properly.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I don't know how you actually implement it, but the good news is that technology has been coming down in price, you know, so much. And I think then, like I was saying with Starlink and some of these other global providers, they are making such a difference. I mean, they've already, you know, made a difference in Iran by providing access where access was blocked. It's probably going to make a difference in China, where you have the Chinese firewall. It's going to make a difference around the world, and it's going to definitely make a difference when you get out into the rest of the world, where there's definitely a socio-economic divide for those that are in the cities versus those that aren't. And so I'm kind of hopeful. I think the other thing that COVID did certainly was we kind of, in the US, we realized how important connectivity was. And one of the first things my wife and I did was buy the next volume up of connectivity so that we wouldn't have any, you know, pauses and what have you. But I think that also made everyone realize how important that is across the whole US, and then of course across the whole world, as to how important that connectivity is. So yeah, I really appreciate your point, Charlitta.
Jump in for a minute as I try to keep my voice. So two things come to my mind, and I think it's been brought up already, and Charlitta, you really nailed it. I mean, it's that equity piece, right? So everyone realized it, right? Like, we realized it. If we didn't before, it became glaringly obvious, you know, where we had connectivity and what that meant in terms of equity and community access and investment and things like that. But on the positive end, I feel as though in the last 2 years, and COVID had something to do with it, I think there was also some rays of hope in terms of how we could use technology and how we could use like this digital landscape to become more connected, more aware, and in some ways, I think more resilient, flexible, and adaptable too. So, I mean, I think there was that aspect of as well. We saw, school districts, individuals, some of our, family members, those people who maybe had never wanted to, had no desire to be so digitally connected, finally getting there or kind of being forced to get on that route. So I think there were some of these positives as well in terms of the last 2 years demonstrating to all of us, how flexible, adaptable, and resilient we could be, which then I think brings us to where we are now, which is like, there's really now no excuse to bridge those divides, right? So we see where the inequities are. We see that we clearly have the appetite and the tools and the resources to address those situations. And so now I think there is, and where there isn't, there really should be like that oomph, that emphasis, that drive to really, get everyone speaking the same language, because it really is our common language. No matter where you are, like technology is the thing that is able to bridge us in this day and age.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. I completely echo your sentiments, Monoswita. I think I completely echo your sentiments. And just to give a little bit of background, prior to joining IBM, I actually spent over 20 years in a telecommunications company. And so I understand digital connectivity. And so I would actually challenge the notion that people don't have digital connections. I think people are connected, but I think they're connected at varying levels. And I think the equity in that is, how do we get everyone to the same level, the same speed, so that they have access to the same speed, the same level at the same time globally, right? So not just talking about in the US, but all across the world. But I think what COVID did is it forced regulators to act faster. Going back to what Monoswita said, it forced us to be adaptable. It forced us to say, you know what, we can't wait 3 years to make a decision about getting laptops in children's hands. We actually need to literally make a decision over the summer. What COVID did is it forced regulators and it forced decision makers to make decisions faster. Power that they had all along, but it took them a very, very long time to make decisions. And what COVID taught us is that the individuals and the governments, the utility companies who had the power, who took a very long time, and it was a very slow and laborious time, process to get those decisions made, it sped them up to make decisions about very important things, like how do we get faster internet in certain countries. So I believe that the connectivity was there. I think the question is, how do we get faster internet in some of these areas so that they can get some of the resources that they need and get caught up to certain regions. And so I see how some of these first responder networks are operating. Some of the regulatory networks are responding with drones. And these are things that I know firsthand, having worked in compliance, used to take months, if not years, to be able to deploy a drone and a satellite. I used to work with satellite engineers in space. I know firsthand, having worked with satellite licensing, engineers, how long it would take to get those done. And I see how now it doesn't take very long to get those done because of COVID. So I think now we've shown that we can be adaptable and that we can act faster and make informed decisions because of COVID. So how do we make informed decisions? We have shown that we can be adaptable, but how do we bridge that divide and be co-collaborators in different industries with these partners and still meet the needs of our business and offer these resources and bring equity into this, global connectivity, this digital literacy, situation, and drive inclusion for all, regardless of the industry that we're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that baseline is really important. What is that? Who defines that?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I have one last question for the group, and I just want to make sure we don't have any questions for the panel before I close us out. Don't see any. Okay, so we're here, everybody here is working in technology, on technology, for nonprofits as part of this event. We work in technology or with technology every day. How do we personally, and this is for everyone, how do we personally remind ourselves and keep this inclusion ethos and this global connectivity idea at the forefront of our brains. And we get so busy and we're so laser focused in on what the objective is, what we're trying to build. How do we remind ourselves and keep ourselves in a place where we remember to think about this other side?
I'll start it out. For me, we have to build it into every single thing that we do. We have to be intentional in our framework, in our technology, in our engineering, in our design plans, in every single thing that we do. We have to build it in. And it can't be an afterthought and it can't be a bolt on. It has to be built in. It has to be a part of our framework. It has to be, a part of our planning. It has to be built into every single thing that we do so that it's part of our AI, it's a part of our infrastructure, it's a part of our engineering. Because the issue is that if it's not intentionally built in to every single thing that we do from a structural perspective, from a design perspective, from a framework perspective, from an architecture perspective, once it gets past certain phases, it's just hard to try to build on at the end of the process. And it's hard to problem solve, and it's hard to try to put it at the end or put training at the end or try to do it as an add-on. But when you try to ensure that it's something that's intentional and that it's put at the beginning of the process, you can ensure that you're meeting the needs of who your audience is going to be, of whatever service or product or program you're building that out for. And that's just something that I do when I'm thinking about a program that I'm going to launch. I ensure that I bring that digital inclusion into everything that I'm building out from a programmatic perspective to ensure that my program meets the needs of my audience, that I can activate across different geographies, different time zones, that it's translatable. And I may not always meet the needs of every single person, but it's definitely intentional into every single thing that I build. I mean, I think that if as leaders, as we're building that out into our products, our technology, into our platforms, into our services, that if we individually take that into consideration when we're building these things, this is how we collectively can make sure that this can be better for future generations to come.
Patrice, you mentioned the word intentional, and I love that word because, I think there's a point in that intentionality aspect where you really need diversity of perspectives at the front end, right? And so, I mean, that's something that sticks in my mind when we're thinking about, building out products or digital inclusion and the audience. Yes, you can't have, the whole world in the room in the design stage, but how intentional are we with the different perspectives in the room at various stages of design? I think that's something that sticks in my mind in terms of, okay, how do we truly make things inclusive? And it's including diverse perspectives, but also I think asking questions of stakeholders. Like part of that testing process is this truly inclusive? Charlitta, you brought up this scenario where when you think about digital inclusion and it's like access, right? Like, is the website accessible to everyone? Well, how do you test for that? Like, where do you ask the questions? Where do you bring in the perspectives? Where does the audience weigh in as a stakeholder? So I think those are some things that, at least in my mind, are like under consideration as we're getting to the point or aspiring to the point of true digital inclusion, getting to that baseline that we'd like for everyone.
And I think we're all getting at the point too, where representation matters, right? And so before we have to, when we talk about human-centered design, who is the human? And is the human that we're centering truly a global human? And that would be multiple personas and multiple people at the table. And we know representation matters. And so I think that is the key takeaway for me in this conversation, is that we've got to make sure that when we're talking about the technology that we're building, the tools that we're leveraging, and even who is a part of the testing, that we always keep in the center that if it's truly global, the persona has to be global. And then we also know that's more than one persona. And the people that are doing the designing and the building and all of those things, they also need to be reflected at the table so that they can bring those thoughts to the design and to the engagement. So I think it is the multiple humans need to be represented.
I think you bring up a really good point, if I may chime in, because Monoswita and you, Charlitta, bring up two really good points when you talk about the human experience. But when we talk about accessibility, sometimes that's the human experience, and it's the disabilities that are seen and unseen as well. So when we talk about like the W3 standards, sometimes I call it WCAG, the WCAG standards, when we're talking about accessibility and the web standards. Some of those are built into sites, some of them are not. A lot of sites are not up to those standards, but it's also up to us to ensure, and I apologize in advance if I don't call it the wrong thing. I call it the right thing, but I know it's WCAG, and I don't know if it's WCAG, but I know it's WCAG, but those standards, but when we deploy certain websites, but it's up to us as program leaders to ensure that our sites meet those standards for our accessibility community, but it's also ensuring that we have the individuals that have reviewed our sites to ensure that they meet accessibility standards. So those are just one of the things that we have to ensure, that when we talk about the human experience, it's not just necessarily the human experience, but it's sometimes it's those seen and unseen. So just ensuring that we've included all of those perspectives, and that's just one of the many perspectives we should be mindful of when we're thinking about the digital experience and digital, inclusivity.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's really hard to add on to what, what everybody's already said, but I really liked as well what Patrice said about being intentional. And I'm on the board of the Atlanta chapter of the American Marketing Association, and one of the things that we did during COVID was to be very, very intentional about inclusion. And that really makes it, not only in the moment when you're doing something for the organization, but you also kind of can think about that a lot more personally as you're going, about your day, doing whatever your job is. And I think that intentionality is absolutely critical, is that it's almost, that's got to be first, and then let everything flow from there. So absolutely. So thanks for that point, Patrice.
Well, we've come to the end. Do you guys have any other parting thoughts before we end today? No, all right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us here in the room, all across the globe. We're very excited to have you. We want to thank Cox for having us in this amazing, beautiful facility. And we really are excited to see what you build. So I guess get back to work. Thank you.